Can we move shut the door? Okay, good evening members and welcome, and nice to have you all back in the chambers for our informal gathering, or our first one to be held live for several months now. We are expecting Councillor Robertson should be here soon. I received an apology from Councillor Hales. I'd like to welcome our members of the gallery who are watching live streaming tonight, and we also look forward to welcoming you back into the gallery after the June long weekend, where we will be able to accommodate I believe almost 20 members of the gallery if you do choose to wish to come and watch the meeting in the council chamber, and we are required to have a COVID safe plan in place and also have a contact tracing register of anyone that attends our meetings. So we'll have that in place after the June long weekend, but it's really lovely to have you all back here in the chamber, and it's also just as nice to have the staff all back together. This is the first time we've all been in the same room and not on Zoom at some time or another, so welcome everyone. Tonight's informal gathering, there are a number of items to go through, and on the agenda we're going to have a presentation regarding our community plan, our draft annual business plan and budget for some in-depth discussion, I hope. Also, I will touch on our strategic projects document, which I forwarded out to members, and Glenn will touch on our asset management plans. But the main reason for tonight is to look at the drafts of our community plan and, most importantly, our annual business plan and budget. So I'm going to hand over to Michelle, who will talk you through the community plan documentation you've all received.
Back here, but I'll just stand up and hopefully that will help. Sorry. So you received the draft of the community plan in your papers. It is a draft, and tonight I'm hoping to get some feedback from you all to further refine it, ready for public consultation in line with the annual business plan. So the plan that's been put together further builds on the aspirations and strategies that went out to consultation earlier this year. Our aim has been to make it quite easy for people to read and follow and get an understanding of the direction of council, the strategic direction. It kind of starts off with some commentary from the Mayor and CEO setting the scene, provides a general snapshot of the council area, goes into the roles that council has, and then provides an overview of our strategic planning framework, which we've talked about a number of times in this chamber at workshops. Then goes on to kind of summarise the themes from the consultation, which we spoke about at the last workshop, looks at challenges and opportunities, and then goes into the aspirations, strategies and priorities from there. So I guess tonight is really about receiving your feedback on the plan, any suggestions, changes, things you like, things you don't like. So I'll throw it out to anyone that has any feedback.
Open for the chat. So, Mayor?
Thank you, Michelle. I think it was a really good community plan, and I think just the level of understanding and the way that it's been written has been great. One of the suggestions that I've got is on page 8 in the role of council. You've got that table, and I wonder whether or not under those headings like information channel, advocate, facilitator, agent, etc., it would be worth putting an example of each of those. I know that it will make the table a little bit bigger, but it might actually help the community understand what those words mean. So that was there. On page 11, I wondered about the paragraph on cost shifting. It might just be me, I'm not too fussed. You've got cost shifting for services and the imposition of new legislative provisions from, I'd put state and federal government to local councils. impacts on our ability. It just makes it clearer that it has come from the states. But I think the rest of it, I mean, there's a few things that I thought, you know, I'd do, but I think it's just a matter of semantics and the way people write different things and in different ways. But I thought it was really good.
If you've got that feedback, Moira, and you do have it marked up, I would be interested to get it and have a look at it.
Yep, sure, I can give you, yep.
Any other members have some comments and feedback for Michelle? Councillor Charles?
I think it's going to be pretty quiet if I don't speak. I don't really have much to say about the community plan except for the Mayor's message. And I thought there's a couple of things there, and that's on page 4, just at the very beginning. Community Plan 2030 will be guiding document for the City of Victor Harbor over the next 10 years, outlining a vision for Victor Harbor that is shared by both Council, Big C, and Community, Little c. Pedantic, but I think community should have a big capital C at the front of it. Council has. Our community is always at the heart, or I'd just cross out always, is at the heart of planning. That's the next paragraph down. These are only suggestions, of course. And then the very last paragraph said, I'm excited to work together with the community. I think our Mayor should be speaking about the elected members. Your elected members are working together with the community as our representative, as our speaker. I don't think there's anything else much there, really. The rest of it is much of a muchness, and you know, you could go through and make lots of changes, perhaps, or very few changes, but I think it strikes what it needs to strike. It's there enough for people to understand that they're only aspirations. The aspirations are what we are trying to achieve in the main. They're not. There's no guarantee with any of this, and things may change over time, but this is how we feel right at this point of time as a council.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson?
I think this has become a very good document. I'm very happy with it. And I particularly like the snapshot, those 2 pages of the snapshot. I think those 2 pages alone say so much with so little, in a sense, that I really, really do like that part.
Any other members, any other feedback, Michelle? And also, obviously, if you're not in a position to give that tonight, I do encourage you, if you have any marked up comments, happy to even just handwrite them up and give them to Michelle. We're really keen to get feedback from members. Councillor Kemp?
That's it, just flashing. Michelle, thanks, Victoria. Look, it's certainly is a vast improvement on the previous plans we've had, and certainly very communicative in the language it's used. I think it's very well done. The only suggestions I would make on page 6, where we got a TAFE campus, should we add Flinders University in there to show that we do have a connection with the university as well in our community? So that would just expand it a bit further. And the only thing, because I know it's a very overarching document and it's a very high level document and we don't really break down into the nuts and bolts, but one of the things I'm just was curious about is under the priorities for the 4 years, and there's some good statements in there, where's the next level of the plan that people can look at and say, okay, in 2022, what we're going to be doing, you know, because the annual plan won't be developed by then. So I'm just wondering, is there another document we could just break it down a little bit more succinct so people can follow through the high levels of aspirations, the strategies, the priorities, and then look at what they could be doing in those next 4 years? Because the strategic direction document did do that a little bit, but not much. But I'm just wondering, can we break it down any further for simplicity, for people to understand what the direction?
Yeah, no, good question. And so that's what we thought would be the certainly the key planned activities within the annual business plan. And so that would then feed up through the annual report. We would be able to show what we accomplished within the year, how it met our priorities, and then the strategies, and then the inspiration. So that annual business plan is that document that comes down to the lower level than this, even though there will be some things that aren't key planned activities that we'll be able to include in our reporting that help us meet our priorities. So the priorities are a bit of a rolling priority document, so they could be updated each year as we go through. Some may drop off and some may come on, but essentially the annual business plan is that lower level document that says what we will do that next year.
Yeah, I'm just wondering from a community perspective, they're looking for something in that priorities list of anything additional which gives them a little bit more meat as to what may be happening in the next, instead of waiting for the annual plan to be developed. Is that too much?
Yeah, it's probably difficult to go down to that level in this particular document, because then we would be essentially having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tiers, and it becomes kind of unwieldy to look at. But what we would be doing is, with this document, we're looking at our broad strategies and then our priorities over a 4-year cycle. And each year we would be pulling the key planned activities out to say which of these priorities do we actually meet, and then which aspirations do they fall under. So there will be a really strong linkage between what happens in an individual year upwards through the plan, as well as going back the other way as well. So it would be difficult to add another layer underneath, I think.
Yeah,
Part of what you're looking for, sorry, Councillor Kemp, would be in the long-term financial plan, when we obviously look at that next review, when we've updated our asset management plans to be more relevant and up to date, and then you've updated your long-term financial plan. The whole idea of that plan with a little bit more detail will be reflective of what the council's potential would be for those 4 years, and you would be allocating potentially projects or items within the 10-year long-term financial plan, because we would be using that, pretty much capturing down each financial year. That would be the basis of your annual business plan and budget for that year, and then doing any fine tuning or other new projects or initiatives that are coming on board. It's if you're wanting another layer, so you're going to have a 10-year long-term financial plan, you've got your annual business plan and budget. It sounds like you're looking for another sort of 4-year strategic plan in between that.
Well, I'm not sort of saying we should have another layer in this document. I think this document is okay. I think it works pretty well. I suppose I'm looking for the connection between this document and the long-term financial plan. If there's a statement put in here about, you know, if people want to look at the 4-year, refer to the long-term financial plan, you may get some indication of what we are thinking. Which would
we could probably put a little bit more commentary on page 9, where we do actually show that framework around that planning, and how we use this plan to then feed into those other plans, and then we pull out the annual business plan each year. We could probably put some more commentary around that.
I think that would be good, because it will direct the community, if they wanted to look at, okay, this is the community plan, okay, we need to look at the long-term financial plan, and direct them through that process. So that will give them better guidance.
We can do that.
Thank you.
Councillor Robertson, welcome. Nice to see you in person.
Thanks, Victoria. I had no idea anywhere on the agenda anywhere that this meeting was being held here tonight, so I'm sorry. I just found out at the last minute. Anyway, I have some comments on the different aspirations that we have in this document. I think there's some key things that are missing out of this, some of which have come up recently. But just on page, on the aspiration 2 on page 17, I think that in the third one at the top there, we could add international relationships as well. I guess that hasn't been discussed yet, but in terms of this is supposed to be a community plan looking into the future, I think that we have good opportunities to do that. So I would put international as well as national relationships. I think missing out of the priorities in 2023 is the study hub. Thought that was something that was being pursued vigorously, but it's not here.
It is in there. It's, where are we? Attract more, where are we? Dot point 6.
0.6 on this page, 17.
Yeah, so it's not specific to the regional study hub, and that would actually probably be a key planned activity within your annual business plan. So this would be that level up from that in terms of creating shared services and providing and attracting investment within the area as well. So there's a couple of them under that priorities that it could possibly fit in, as well as in the strategies. Whereas the very specific to organise that regional study hub would probably be one of your key planned activities in your annual business plan.
Okay, but to me, it's something that goes in as a priority for 2023. Anyway, the other one just underneath that, dot point 3, is continue to pursue delivery of an arts and culture centre. I would hope that by 2023 that would be not just a building but a program. And on what the success looks like on the right hand side, dot point 3, increase in number of households with broadband access. I would think that priority for us, or what success would look like, would be the number of businesses with broadband access, not households, plenty of them, but on the aspiration 3 on 19, that what the success looked like on the right hand side be the number of new businesses. I think an increase in the number of businesses with new ones. I think missing out of this one too is in general in the document, but perhaps it's in here. We don't have any success indicators for Indigenous involvement in this program. The sixth dot point down on the right hand side on page 19, people feel, I mean, it's tricky to measure that, but Victor's heritage is effectively protected. Me, it would be more that our heritage is celebrated rather than protected. Of course, that goes along with that. Then on aspiration 4, there doesn't seem to be much in this on the marine, on the coastal environment, and we've got in there my pet problem with item 4 on the priorities is promoting responsible dog and cat management. I think we've got that. I think we really should be talking about, which we don't in here, about really actively pushing back on the slaughter of our native wildlife. And the success would look like that we actually had more birdsong in the backyards, and particularly that we'd be working towards healthy outflow and water coming out of the Inman and Hindmarsh River estuaries. And on aspiration 5, page 23, we're getting down into some of the stuff here which, if we're actually going to do this as opposed to writing it down, then we're going to have to explain it to the population, and it would be a big deal if we actually said that dot point 5 on the priorities for 2023, it says here we facilitate, this is kind of pretty weak language, facilitate the implementation of collective impact planning as a means of supporting collaboration and networking between services and agencies. To me, it's kind of wishy-washy. But if you were to say that, okay, as a council, we are going to make collective impact planning the default mode in which we carry out our social and community development, that would be a big deal. But you have to explain it to people. It's a very good program, like place-based development, which is a phrase that's creeping into the reports here, but nowhere is it explained. It's a big deal if you do it, but if you do it, you have to do it properly. Otherwise, you really fall over badly. So this one here, to me, is that council will make the implementation of collective impact planning, you know, and here I would put a question to the CEO. I mean, Mark Oliphant has departed. Tell me if it's a question you can't answer, but his replacement, did we put down in the terms of reference or the job description of the person we're looking for that they had significant practical experience in collective impact planning or place-based development? Because that's the sort of thing where, you know, at a change and manager level, if you're really serious about doing this kind of thing and not just putting down words here, that you would actually, you know, put that in. The next person that comes along to replace Mark would actually have those skill sets writ large. And similarly, just over on the other side of page 23.
Did you want me to answer that, Councillor Robertson?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I figured you asked me a question. So we haven't advertised or promoted that position as yet, because one of the things I'm very conscious of is undertaking a review of our community services area and making sure that the person that fills that position also understands that review we're undertaking. So I've held off recruiting, and we're doing some obviously holding fort at the moment, because I want to give consideration to the needs and qualifications and skills and the direction this council is looking to head in those areas. So it's something I haven't filled as yet, because I've got all those things to consider.
Thanks, Sarah. But I mean, if the council felt that this is really cutting edge stuff, place-based development and collective impact planning, this council would be one of the first in South Australia to take that, would be the first to take it on board fully. It's a great approach, but it means all in. So I think what we need to do is maybe have a further session on this, because if we were to put it in and boost this up and say, rather than facilitate, that we're going to actually do it in the next 4 years, then it would be good to put that in, I think. Because over on the right-hand side, you'll see improvements in the CFA index for disadvantage. This is an ABS suite of 4 social indicator indexes. And of course, where the one that's most interested to Victor Harbor is the disadvantage index. But even within Victor Harbor, if you look at the latest figures for 2016 on the CFA index, we have an average of 958, but the CFA index varies considerably across the city, from disadvantaged areas to the other ones. So if we talk about what success looked like in improvements to the CFA index, well, then you would be wanting to talk about whether that was an improvement in the overall index, or we would hopefully we'll hopefully have an increase in the index for the more disadvantaged places in our in the council area. So to me, that this stuff is if we put it in here, this you know, the social economic index for areas, that if we put it in there, we need to somehow in here put in there that we've got what we mean by that for people. And lastly, aspiration 6. This is focused on the council, but to me, there's some really important institutions. So this is just focused on the council as a financially sustainable and well-governed organisation. Our community plan depends on not just the council being a financially sustainable and well-governed organisation, but all of the other institutions that are so important in our society here, which includes, for instance, a strong chamber of commerce, which includes the sporting clubs, which includes the service clubs. It's not just to me about the council, important though the council is. So I have some other comment, and similarly, dot point 7 on that encourage and support the Victor Harbour Horse Tram Authority to develop and expand income streams. Well, that's what we should be doing across all the business areas, including Frawa, FRAC, you know, the horse-drawn tram, etc., not just the horse-drawn tram authority. And yeah, and some of the priorities we have in here are ones that I would have thought are just regular council duties, if you like, or outputs rather than something to be a priority. But yeah, so I have a few other comments, but I'll send them through.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Councillor Litley.
Yeah, I'd just like to commend you on a very professionally put together document that does actually take on the discussions and the input that we as a chamber have given. So very well done. It is professionally presented, and bar from a few final suggestions tonight that I'm sure will be taken into consideration, I think it's an outstanding document. Well done.
Councillor Glasbrook.
Yeah, I'll just be very quick. I agree, a very good document, but for me, it's always been the same. It seems to just lack detail for me. And I know you say that it's an overarching policy and you've got to look at this policy and you've got to look at that policy. And I suppose that's my issue rather than the issue with the document. But just for example, in the index, you know, it tells you to go to page 26 for council plans and strategies. So when I saw that in the index, I went straight to page 26 because I thought, you little beauty, that's what I want to see. And it's just a list of other documents that you need to try and read. So I don't know, as I say, I totally agree, it's a fantastic document. It's very well presented and I just marvel at the amount of time you must have put into that. But I just like to see a little bit more detail. I've always said the same thing.
In terms of that appendix, hopefully this will be an electronic form of documentation. So all of those plans could have links to those actual documents. So if you're reading it, you want to link into it rather than actually making the document, you know, this thick. So people can refer and review. And I think the commentary around having some explanations around some of the detail in here so people understand what, you know, CFA is and the, you know, place-based planning is. I think those explanations is really important. But if you've got any other ideas in regards to where more commentary explanation, we're happy to take that on board.
No, it's just, I mean, it's probably what this document's supposed to be. As I say, it's probably my issue. Everything's just airy-fairy, just sort of covers everything. You know what I mean?
Unfortunately, that's what a community plan does.
That's what I mean. But I just sort of think, well, what's the point, really? I mean, you know. But anyway, that's just me.
Yeah, I understand. I take that on board. And it's a bit like any, you know, where we have to reference, not at the moment because I don't have one, but a state strategic plan is even more high level that we're supposed to reference and then see how we link into that. I think if it is able to articulate those aspirations and those strategies of our community, I think it certainly does lay a good foundation for us to then be able to expand and broaden in our other plans like this one, which I think gives you more detail of where, you know, particular projects and deliverables, and then our annual report, which should be able to link, which Councillor Robertson, I know, has a real interest in, and making sure that really tells the story and says what we've done and where we've been.
And the other thing too, with the plans and strategies that are listed on that page, as they come up for review, they should all be referencing the new community plan. And so that's where a lot of the detail is around something like your environmental management plan should then be providing those linkages back to your community plan once it's endorsed. So there is a lot of detail, albeit not in this document.
Do you have any other questions, Councillor Lee?
this is kind of a welcome mat for the community, but those other plans certainly feed back into this to refer it back to, so it's a closing the loop, so to speak. I agree with you, like, if you're a detail orientated person, this leaves you wanting, but those links, when they're there, and we're more and more now, everyone's going to digital, and you can go down the rabbit holes as much as you want if you've got those links there, so.
Did any other members have any other comments? And as I just emphasise, if you do have hard copy comments to give back to Michelle about anything, please get them through to her so she can make those changes, and happy to take any other comments in the meantime. Did you want to finish up, Michelle?
No, I guess I'll just like to kind of cover off again on the pulling all the documents together. And I think this new community plan is going to make our reporting a lot better. I think the annual report will become a really important document in being able to show everything that we're doing to achieve our aspirations within this community plan. And I think it gives us a lot of opportunity to show the community how we're delivering on the vision by telling more stories and just being able to report a lot better. So I think this document will give us that opportunity, tying that in with the annual business plan, reviews of the long-term financial plan and asset management plans. I think all our strategic documents are coming together really well, and hopefully that will provide a much better picture at the end of it. Just in regard to feedback, Kelly will probably touch on this with the annual business plan, but just add deadlines for getting the agenda ready. Kelly, I'll need feedback by close of business tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Kelly now, who is actually going to take you through the draft annual business plan and budget. We're just handing out a couple of the line items for capital and operating items, which we've just marked as privileged because it breaks down to a lot of detail for both capital and operating. Just to give you a current picture of where we're at, you have received these documents before. I think this may be even the third time you received them, but we have been making changes, obviously, since we started this process last year, would you believe? So once Kelly's got them handed out, I'll let Kelly take you through our next stages.
Thank you, Victoria. So I've just handed out, like Victoria said, a detailed listing for you so you know where we're sitting at the moment with what's presented in the annual business plan. The report actually details any adjustments that have been made since the last workshop, as well as providing some other considerations in terms of items that aren't included currently in the annual business plan, and looking for feedback essentially so that we can have a semi-finalised draft to come back to council for endorsement to go out to public consultation. So happy to go through the annual business plan overall as in terms of content and formatting. Sorry, can't breathe. Take breath. So essentially the annual business plan is in a similar format to last year, although we have made an effort to draw back and pull back on the key planned activities. And the key planned activities that we've picked just in draft form are essentially ones that we thought the community would be particularly interested in terms of what's happening in their backyard, more than the recurring projects that they may not be aware of. For instance, there may not be a great concern for a particular stormwater project if people don't see it and they haven't been impacted by flooding. So we've tried to pick out ones that we think people will be really interested in, and then we can write some really good stories around everything else that council has delivered in the annual report. Each of the pages from page 22 onwards break down our activity areas into those headings that we commenced last year, and we've switched around the dollar figures in line with consultation and feedback from last year. So we're showing the net result as a negative rather than the other way around. So it means that internal staff have to think backwards. But this is a community document, so we've done it so it's outward facing based on your feedback last year. showing what is a deficit or a council contribution as that negative amount to an activity. So interested in feedback on that. In terms of the key planned activities, we've also got the community plan links in there. So the little icons that are in the community plan have been carried through to the key planned activities to show where the linkages are, and most of them have at least 2 linkages back to the community plan in terms of the ones that have been selected. Areas where there hasn't been any key planned activities identified, we've provided a little bit of commentary around major activities within that area that have carrying through possibly even from this year. So like on page 32 and 33, we've got some commentary there around the new planning system implementation. We haven't called it a key planned activity as such because it's something we have to do, but it does have a significant impact on council resources and processes. So putting some commentary around that. Just likewise, public safety, again, something that we have to do, but has taken considerable council resources and will continue to do so until we're in full recovery. So we've also provided at the end a listing of all of those key planned activities on one page, on page 46, for easy reference in terms of those projects, as well as the normal budget summary and then the financial statements to go with that. So happy to take any feedback, answer any questions. If they're the detailed list that I have just provided you, I know you wouldn't have had a chance to have a look through those. But if there is anything in particular that you feel is a deal breaker or needs to be discussed by exception, that would be really good to have that discussion so that we can think about how we formulate that into the draft that comes back to you. So again, no decisions, but if you can give us a bit of direction, we can then have a look at what we can provide to you at the special council meeting coming up. So happy to take your questions.
And I maybe just ask members just to try and keep it into 2 separate areas. If we can maybe look at capital items first, and obviously there's some commentary in the memorandum that was provided with the documentation around some of the inclusions, exclusions of those items that we still need to have some consideration. The council has actually made some decisions in the last couple of months that weren't in the draft budgets previously. They're still sitting there. We need to have some of those conversations. So maybe, and then we can look at some of the operating. So if we can stay with the capital items first and maybe talk through some of the commentary that was presented to members. And Glenn's here obviously to answer any of those questions. There's a couple that have come up that probably could do with some discussion, particularly in the memo. Councillor Henderson?
In the workshop report here, Kent Reserve irrigation has been removed. Could you remind me why we decided to remove that?
Yeah, that was taken out probably due to resource level, looking at the overall projects for the financial year and looking at our current staff numbers. So that one was forgone from the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Jenkins and then Councillor Roberts.
Just looking at the Encounter Bikeway, and I know that when we had a meeting with one of the residents, I think David was there as well, there are a couple of things that we discussed in relation to that. And one of those was to undertake the detailed design of the whole bikeway rather than just that Bridge Terrace section, but to look at it. But the other one is whether or not, given COVID and the amount of money we're spending, and I think a point that Councillor Hales brought up when we were discussing the public consultations about whether or not it's actually necessary to do that bikeway now, whether that can be put off for a year, both and then do the whole bikeway. We've got so many projects on at the moment. We've got the COVID stuff happening. The community hasn't been crying out for a new bikeway. It's something that's been in the pipeline that's now come to fruition, the Bridge Terrace part, and whether it's worth putting it off and then perhaps at the next budget looking at a detailed design for the whole bikeway all the way across to Alexandrina Council and doing it that way rather than putting all of that in now. Not sure what others think of that.
Happy to open that up for some discussion. Councillor Henderson?
I'm not really sure that it's worth spending money on an overall plan, because there are parts of this plan already in the pipeline. We already have in this budget the widening of the pathway along Franklin Parade. That is one section of that overall plan. So I believe our community will be able to see that we are developing an overall plan, even if we are just doing one section at a time. And we've had the community consultation on the Bridge Terrace part of that. And the community is also aware that we're looking at the next section. So, yeah, I think anyone out there in the community who is interested will see that there is an overall plan. They can put the pieces together. So I'm not sure we need to spend time and energy and money on drawing up an overall plan, either now or into the future. In terms of deferring those sections, Bridge Terrace and the next section on from that to the Alexandrina Council boundary, yes, it's probably a good idea to defer that given the financial constraints we're going to be under in this next year.
Councillor Litley?
Yeah, I'll endorse what Councillor Henderson said. I believe that we are showing a great deal of planning and it might be planning on the go, but we are speaking that out aloud, and we are leading by example that we have a plan and we're following the same a consistent approach to it. I do agree though that yeah, spending money on the design and going ahead with the Bridge Terrace, it might not be the best timing at this stage. I think that you know, it is in our plan. We have a decision on the table and we can stick to that going forward. But yeah, spending the money in the right, if we're looking to make some savings now, which we all are, that might be a good thing to put that on ice for a bit.
Councillor Robertson?
Yeah, I'd agree with Councillor Henderson there in the sense that I agree with what's been previously proposed by Councillor Kemp, that we go out to the community with an overall plan for this bikeway, because as we found out during the Bridge Terrace exercise, that the people are very willing to pick on the rest of the bikeway, in the sense, oh, well, this is not what's being done here is not being done elsewhere, and why not? And therefore trying to deflect action at Bridge Terrace. But the other thing is, I do hope that we, from out of this exercise, which we've spent quite a bit of time and planning on from the engineering department, that there are some very easy things that we can do to upgrade the bikeway as we have it now, with just a bit of paint on the pavement. And but also one of the things that's really holding us up in doing something on this bikeway is that the decision, I guess, still hasn't come from the minister as to whether that piece of land, section 51, I think it's called, is going to be vested in the council or not. That will make a big difference to the bikeway. But yes, I agree that we're going ahead, I believe, with the new toilet block, which is a good thing for that Bridge Terrace bikeway down there. That's always a good thing to add more toilet blocks to Victor. But the actual bikeway, yes, I think there are some things we've learnt out of this exercise that we can do for sort of out of operating budget, $5,000 or something like that, to get us a few licks of paint. We don't need consultants to do it, and would considerably improve the bikeway. But yes, the expenditure of large amounts of money, I think, could wait until we've got an overall master plan for it. Thank you.
Councillor Kemp?
Thank you. It's interesting, we have a lot of documents called master plans, and why do we have them? If they're not important, you know, to give us a complete overview exactly what we are trying to build, design and implement. We're looking about, I'm not quite sure how many kilometres it would be, 10, 15 kilometres of bikeway going along a foreshore. I would expect a master plan would look at a whole lot of infrastructure to support that bikeway, rock walling to protect the coastline from the sea washing away and undermining the bikeway. It's just not simply putting bitumen on a road or on a bit of land 3.5 metres wide and call it a bikeway. This is about looking at the whole environmental infrastructure on how we do build this through certain conservational type areas, how we deal with the sand dunes issues, how do we deal with the coastal issues. So a master plan looks at all those aspects, I believe, and that's why we need to have a master plan, because doing it in piecemeal is an ad hoc, well, not quite an ad hoc approach, it's more of a piecemeal approach which really can be disconnected in its design at times. And I think if you're going for budgets and going for grant funding, sometimes government departments who are looking at these things would like to see a bigger picture. And if you show them the big picture, what we're trying to achieve, but we're only doing this section this year, but it's consistent all the way through its design, structure, and how it sits in within the environment, I think we have a better chance of getting the funding we need. And I think by doing a master plan, you may even come up with better options or alternative options, which may be much better than what we think now at the moment in a piecemeal approach. So, you know, that's why I believe we use master plans for, because it's the bigger picture, it's the overall picture. I think we still need to do it for that purpose.
Councillor Charles?
Mayor Jenkins started this off, and she's picked a project out of many projects, and it's probably one of the very important ones, one of the ones which would benefit the community in many ways. But there are so many that we've got on the go, we're going to have to do some pruning as far as I'm concerned. As far as doing a project and looking at you know, the whole thing and doing this plan that Councillor Kemp's talking about, I think it's necessary. But then the portion, as was said also by our Deputy Mayor, of Franklin Parade and the footpath along there, I liken that to a road that needs repair and needs some modification. Brian, surname now, but Brian constantly tells us that people said they wouldn't use, so that was unnecessary to have that walking path along there. No one will ever use it. It was back when it was first mooted by council, whoever it was so long ago. But it's quite clear why it's being used, because we've got such a high intensity of people living in that area. And that is their footpath. They don't have many other footpaths, let's face it. We could be doing a lot of work with footpaths where people really need them at their front door, taking them to a place which they go regularly, rather than trying to get them down the beach and present something down there. So from my point of view, we need to do that Franklin Parade bit. It's not going to change again. That needs to be done to adequately take care of the people who are currently using it and loving it and needing it. And the other areas, as far as I'm concerned, that can wait. The rest can just wait, because it's not going to impact anybody. It's a needed thing, but it's a need minus, 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 as opposed to many other things which are pluses. So that's what I'd be doing.
Glenn, would you like to comment at all? It's obviously council does have your the bike strategy. Obviously, it doesn't give a master plan of the Encounter Bikeway, but it does give a strategy.
That's right. And we went out on site a couple of Fridays ago, I think. We had a look at those options from Haywood, and Lot 51 was part of that option. So reports coming back at the June council meeting, cost options, looking at the pros and cons for those options, and probably putting in option 0 is retain what's already there, just repairing or the signage or some other paved area of the 2.5 or 3 metre asphalt surface that's already in existence. So that's also an option. So that's been brought back to council for June. And for the bridge terrace, there's a resolution there that $40,000 would be provided in the next financial year's budget for the design for bridge terrace. So something that you've been talking about of not proceeding with that, I guess. having the $60,000 in the budget to look at the overall master plan for that, all of the areas of the bike strategy.
So yeah, I just draw that to members' attention, and it's on page 2 of the memorandum. So there is a resolution at your meeting, I can't recall whether it was March, that you endorsed option 2 for the Bridge Terrace bike strategy, but then you provide provision in your draft budget $40,000 for detailed design. What we're suggesting is more around a detailed design from Bridge Terrace all the way through to the edge of Alexandrina, because you're already looking at that part. Now, council can choose, it's not looking at construction, we're not looking at actually building anything, but actually just doing that in its entirety rather than just Bridge Terrace. That's what's being suggested. There is provision in the budget already of 60,000 to allow that to happen. The council can choose to leave that in there or take it out. We're certainly not suggesting any construction next financial year. It's just not achievable. Councillor Glasbrook.
Well, just for the record, I'm strongly in favour of the bike track. I think it's going to be a great asset for the town, but I really don't know why we're spending all of this time talking about it. As far as I'm concerned, we need to find about 950,000 out of our operating budget, and I'm not at all in favour of borrowing $7 million in this financial year towards our capital. So let's not worry about sitting around talking about $20,000 or $40,000 on a bike track for hours on end. Let's find $1 million and let's cut a few $1 million out of our capital, because that's what our community, I believe that's what our community wants us to do.
Well, I guess there's not one item that's $1 million in the budget. So
No,
what you
we
actually
need
have to do is find all the 20,000, 60,000 and 40,000
Well,
and
we need to
actually
find something more,
look to adjust. So
more substantial than that. And, well, first of all, we have to find if there's desire within the council to actually achieve that. I'm certainly, well, I can tell you, I won't be supporting the budget. I can tell you that now. So it's up to everybody else. Either they want to spend their time and try and work it out, or if everyone else is going to support it, we might as well I'll just sit here and be quiet. It's pretty easy.
So maybe before we move on to operating, I'd just like to highlight just a couple of more issues for your consideration around the capital, if that's okay. So we've talked about the Encounter Bikeway. I just wanted to bring your attention to that second dot point under other considerations on page 2 of the memo, that we have received notification and in fact the money for from the Australian Government Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program. So we've put that into the capital budget in terms of the income, and we've put a corresponding expense, but it hasn't actually been applied to any particular job at this point in time. One of the possible projects includes some shoulder upgrades on Waipinga Road from Mill Road to Range Road. So that is one project that is in the asset management plans, but that could be brought forward and would fit the criteria of that particular grant funding. So that's something for council's consideration as well. A couple of other issues. Wagon Road black spot funding is the grant as well as the corresponding works are in the annual business plan and draft budget at the moment. We've also received notification that we've been successful in that, and we've been successful in getting more funding than we thought we would get. So we do need to do some work around that in terms of that staged project and whether or not it can continue to be staged or whether we have to complete it next year as well. So there may be some adjustments around the capacity in regards to that. A couple of other projects that you need to be aware of. There is a discussion that needs to be had around the Caravan Park and some works required there, which I might refer to Glenn in a moment around that. And also McKinley Street and demolition of that property in there, where the council wanted to undertake that separately to the other processes that we're going through around car parking in that space. One thing I do want to highlight is that we haven't received all the funding agreements for the grants, the capital grants that we've received. Normally, well, as per the accounting standards, when we receive income is when we have to recognise it in the accounts. There is a new accounting standard, AASB 15, if you're interested, that actually allows us to recognise income as a liability and then actually recognise it as income in the year that it pertains to. So if we received some of this funding, say, this month, we would be able to put it into our books as a liability and then pull it back in as income when we actually complete the works. What it requires is there has to be a contractual arrangement in place around that project and very specific conditions of grants or contracts. So we won't know until we go through all of those grant funding agreements whether the amount of capital income we've included in the annual business plan at the moment will be able to be all receipted in 2021 when the works are happening. And so that's something we'll need to be working on through this process as we come up to adoption as well. But waiting on all of those funding agreements to come through. So it's a bit of a don't know exactly yet, but as soon as we get them, we'll work through those and see if we can make sure there's a contractual arrangement in place and there's specific enough grant conditions around the completion of those works and the required acquittals. So that may influence the income that's in the annual business plan in the capital revenue section at the moment. So, Councillor Charles.
Thank you. Wagon Road has become a major artery for people. People have discovered it. Now we've got the development down there on Green Hills Park. More and more people are finding it. It's a way in and a way out. We've only got 2 bridges really to talk about to get through. And so I see the value in that. When it comes to this bike track or bike and walking trail, we have a grant, you're saying, for that? We look like we've got a grant for that?
I believe we've applied for Black Spot grant funding, and Glenn may be able to add some more in terms of the amount or what that covers.
Yes, got Black Spot funding from the federal government, so that's over 2 years of upgrading that road and shoulder widening and sealing and repairs.
No, that's good. I meant the bike track. The bike track, we haven't got no. Well, that's good because, you know, it's a bit like a retailer saying, I'll give you 50% off, but you've got to find the other 50%. Sometimes we get sucked into things because we've got a grant. That doesn't mean it's going to cost us nothing. You know, we've got so many footpaths to maintain. At present moment on South Coast Television, I've opened my face and started talking about bike tracks. And also, if the public are now looking at it, and that's when you look at the area north or land side of Hayward Court and Hayward Street and all that area along there, the number of footpaths is minimal. And some have only gone down recently, like Mentone Road, because of the Aquatic Centre, and down Ocean Road, another one, and Sutherland Avenue. But other than that, people walk on the road. So why would we want to encourage them to go down a cliff face or an incline, a very steep incline down onto the beach to walk into Victor Harbour when they're already satisfied walking along the road, on the quiet roads, and we can build up those areas into safe walking areas year by year rather than doing the whole lot all at once. So that's where I stand on this. I just had to say that one more time, but it's really a matter of priorities, where our needs and wants are 2 different things. And we've got to control ourselves this time around because it's a very, very important budget.
I just wanted to talk about the Caravan Park one as well. We received a report and there's a couple of options for the beachfront holiday park fire protection for the annual site. So we're looking at, there's a budget bid being placed or just under, or about $55,000 as well. That's just been placed forward for Council's consideration. And also the City of Victor Harbour Building Fire Safety Committee's been advised. We're probably looking at holding a meeting with that committee to discuss those options from that report. But one that's been selected that is a possible option out of that report is, like I'm saying, around $55,000 for those works at the Caravan Park for next financial year.
Could you just expand on that, please, Glenn? What
Yep.
type of works for 55,000? Because I thought the report recommended from the Building Fire Safety Committee hose reels between every 2 sites. I want to see that would be $55,000 worth.
Expand on what the money will be for.
Yeah, basically.
Well,
Yeah.
on the budget bid that I've got in front of me, it's got supply and install fire protection systems as per the recommendations from Florian Fire Consulting to achieve compliance with regulatory requirements. Recommendations include the installation of 2 11,000 gallon or 55,000 litre storage tanks equipped with compliant fire service couplings, level indicators and signage. Recommendations also include the installation of fireproof fences between 2 sites sites that do not achieve the required minimum separation distance between structures. That's one of the options, or a hybrid of a couple that the building office has been liaising with the firm Florian Fire Consulting. But like I said, there's 6 options in the report. And I've suggested that that gets discussed further with the Building Fire Safety Committee to see what option is the preferred option. And by having the tanks, because the SA water main that runs through to the park, I believe is only 80 millimetre in diameter, where the mains it needs to be 100. So that's why there's tanks. Otherwise, council would have to pay for the upgrade of the SA water line into the property. That's my understanding. The company's report was Florian Fire Consulting for consideration.
Yes, answer to your question is SA Water aren't prepared to upgrade it. If we were requiring it, we would need to do it, and that would be significantly more. But we've still got to present the costings and the options back to the Building Fire Safety Committee. This one option will meet the fire safety standards that are required to be met, but we just want to run it past the Building Fire Safety Committee first.
So in terms of the full capital budget and the quantum amount, I guess, in terms of the financials around that, we're looking at a large a capital budget, again, similar to this year. And what is in there at the moment is stretching capacity, so it would be difficult to add any more projects in without taking some out, just for elected members' information. In regards to borrowing, so that we can actually fund this plan, we've got a maximum of $7 million in the statements that may be required. Excuse me. And whilst that is a large amount and will bring our total borrowings back up to around 15 million, we have been at that point before. So the graph in the annual business plan on page 16 actually shows in 2011-12 where we were at exactly the same level with the building of the ring road and the civic centre. So in terms of having major projects that we're funding this year, I guess it would be fairly similar to that situation that we were in then. The good thing for us is that fixed term loans at that stage were about 6.9 to 7.5%. They're not anywhere near that at the moment in terms of fixed term loans. They're sitting around the 2.5% to 3%, depending on the time we take them out for. And the variable loans are also almost as low as that. So in terms of taking out borrowings, if council is looking to have major and significant projects, this is a good time to do it in terms of the economic and the market around the borrowings themselves. So that is one fortunate impact of the economic situation internationally and nationally, is that we have really, really low interest rates at the moment. So if we were looking to take out those loans and fix some of them, it would be at a really good rate. So that's just some of the background information. We also have a number of the loans that will have matured this year, and then we'll have another 4 that will mature next year as well. So we'll be paying those out and reducing the amount of loans we have back down as well. So the 4 that will be paid out will be repayments of around $1.5 million, and that will get those off of the books as such, and they're ones that are at those high levels of interest rates as well. Councillor Robertson.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, just wanted to go back on to ask a question. It was about what was discussed before. I noticed, and I had a question about the on page 2, this unallocated money from the Australian government. That was that grant that was both local roads and community infrastructure program. I think they were 2 separate programs in that brief. Was it the 355,000 that was announced for Victor Harbour? Was there a split along those lines, or it would have been, or you don't have the documentation yet to say what it could be used for?
No, we do have documents in terms of the criteria that can apply to, and it was actually one grant program. It was just called Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program, and it is specifically sort of towards those road type projects that will have a community benefit. So in terms of public safety and things like that, as well as building the infrastructure. And also it did have in there around needing to pull forward a project that isn't already in the budget, in the draft budget, for stimulus purposes as well. So we would need to look at projects that are somewhere in the asset management plans, or that have come up since we put together the draft budget, and use those funds on that project in particular.
Because my thinking on this was, I'll come back to later on in the final program tonight on the list of capital projects, is that this year and next, I believe, on both our capital and operating budgets, we should have a suite of investments that are going to be directly related to helping our community recover from this COVID lockdown impact. And so to me, roads are important stuff and that, but they don't, for instance, generate any employment, and they don't necessarily raise output or economic growth, income. So are they really that important in terms of the overall message? And also in terms of considering the community's, morale and confidence and mental health, etc. There would be other things that we could be spending that money on if it was allowed to do that. I noticed, for instance, on the Waipinga road program this year, the sealed roads component of that, the budget for 1920 for that was $605,000. So far, here we are, beginning of June, year to date expenditure is $475,000. But the 2020, but being put over into 2021 is $355,000. I'm not sure whether that's waiting for money coming from from out of the grant program, or why it is that the project has gone up in price from about 605,000 to somewhere in the order of 800,000.
So if I can just answer that one for you before you go on. So in terms of the money that's in there, the March budget review would have reduced that budget amount back because that project is completed. Yep. The amount that's been punched in against that line is in line with the second dot point under other considerations on page 2 of the memo, where we've just made a tentative allocation against road shoulder upgrades from Mill Road to Range Road on Waipinga Road, so that we can put it in the budget. It's a tentative project allocation unless another one comes up as more important. So that's what that 355 is.
Okay.
Equal to the grant funding that we received.
Okay. So coming back to what I was saying before about projects that are really going to help employment, income, output from our community for this year, and particularly looking after people's confidence, that maybe if it was allowed, that money, the 355,000, was be allowed to be put into the community infrastructure component of that grant program, or heavily into that rather than into roads. So there might be some other programs out there that we might use that. So the other one on the borrowings for this year, coming back to that, is that I think we know we have a number of projects banking up that are particularly large, really large, and that would make $15 million capital program for this year look like chicken feed. So and in the future, I'm not sure that we aren't going to be impacted on revenue in the council here. Whereby, you know, if people's incomes, if house prices, etc., tumble away a bit, people seek re-evaluations, we could see reduction in income. So we have to be really careful about what we put into the borrowings for this year. I agree with Councillor Glasbrook on some of that, but I also like to see that what we do on the in the projects that we consider have a very strong focus on helping community recover.
So in terms of that particular grant stream, it is specifically around infrastructure. So we can definitely have a look at the criteria and see if there is something more suitable during maybe even during the public consultation period, because it might take us a while to get that done. But instead of a road, essentially what we've just said is we've put it in there, so there's a capital amount in there, and in terms of infrastructure, essentially we would be looking at roads, footpaths, open space, those type of things that fit within the infrastructure brand. But we can definitely have a look and see what the other options are.
Because another thing that is a council initiated project is which I think is good, is what the IT department's working on at present with respect to putting a pipeline through from the council through to various locations in town here to further develop the availability of internet in the central business area. And that is going to be one of the key factors driving business recovery, particularly in the central area, as a place where, you know, the entertainment might be the principal business product out of it, rather than strictly retail. And so it's those sort of things also that to me are, you know, enhancing that but it's not even a project on our books at present because this COVID stuff has come at us, but it will be one of the things that would be really important.
Thank you, Councillor Litley.
Councillor Robertson, I both agree and disagree with you on your thoughts there with regards to just a road. Should we be spending money on just a road, or should we be putting it into projects that are going to boost our community's hopes and ideals and economic development? We need to do both. We need to make sure that we maintain our assets and underpin, I think Councillor Glasbrook is on these lines, deliver the services and the infrastructure that we as a council must deliver, and keep our community confident in us doing the spending money in the right way, so that we can go on as we know as a community, life as usual. Rubbish is picked up, the water drains away through the stormwater system, you're driving roads without potholes, you can walk on a footpath, those sorts of things. We really do need to, I'm sure we all know that we need to bed down at this time and be very sensible and work together as a collective here, as a chamber, to make sure that we are making absolutely right decisions. We also need to take opportunities. You know, we could look at this situation with a glass half full or glass half empty. At the moment, the water line's in the middle of my glass. That's all I know at this stage. Is it going to be exciting and are we going to boom in the next 6 to 8 months and 2 years Are we going to have all these opportunities? Are they going to come to fruition if we act now? Is it going to really spark us? Are we in that best position? We don't really know that at the moment. So I tend to agree with Councillor Glasbrook, and also disagree with him as well. Those small amounts, we should be chipping away at those small amounts, I think, to get a bigger amount. But certainly I feel that, you know, whatever decisions we make, I don't think we can take our eyes off the ball as far as those the general things that we as a council have to do. We have to keep fixing our roads. We can't let our assets deteriorate. And they're the first things I think need our attention. And as we go through in these last process of this budget, that's the way I'll be looking at it as a councillor. I think we need to think about that. Hopefully we can come up with a few projects and be shovel ready on projects as well to take the opportunities. We've seen that we have been successful with railway terrace and other things like that we do need to have some bubbling along there, but we just need to be really sensible, and more to the point, we need to work together. Absolutely.
And I think too, further to that, Councillor Littley, in terms of projects and having projects that are shovel ready and getting those big grants, I think that in combination with councils, with the council approving the change in the local weighting within the procurement policy is really important. So, you know, doubling that within the weighting for local content where available will allow us to get contractors or have contractors that will bring in local people. So there should hopefully be some on-flow from that procurement level as well. Sorry, Mayor, did you have your hand up? Yep.
Thank you. I was just going to really agree with Councillor Littley, and you know, I think the other members have also made comments that both I agree with, and I'm not too sure of. We have, you know, COVID's brought some really challenging times, but it's also provided us as a council with opportunities that we wouldn't normally have as well. And I think that taking advantage of those opportunities is really important. And also listening to the advice, I think, Kelly, that you give us in terms of our borrowings and what we're able to do. And I think you drew attention to the graph that you've got in the business plan on page 2. I can't remember what page it was now, page 16, about our borrowings, and I think we are in a good place, and certainly extremely low interest rates. From what I've heard, you know, it's interesting. Councillor Robertson talks about house prices going down, and sort of from what I've been reading, that may be the case in the cities, but in the regional areas, they're very much talking about house prices going up and regional areas becoming a lot more popular. And so just as, you know, there may be challenges in the future, there's also opportunities for councils like us. I think that it is that balance about maintaining current services that our community wants, and I think our community would be really pissed off. That's a professional psychological word, if we just focused on future infrastructure and the opportunities. But I also think that they would be very disappointed with us if we didn't take advantage of what we can do. So I think it is about that balance, about maintaining our current service levels, but also looking at the future and the opportunities that are coming our way. And there's some really big opportunities and big projects that we've been planning for that I don't think we can let go. But I think, as Councillor Littley said, and also I think Councillor Glasbrook as well, we've just got to chip away. And if there's some things that we can chip away and it save money that aren't necessarily priorities for the community now, I think we can afford to do that as well.
So just a question, I guess, in terms of the annual business plan itself, before we sort of move on to operating or cover off on any other capital items. Are you reasonably happy with the format and the setup of the plan in terms of its readability and the information that's provided in there as a good balance between high level and detail? Councillor Kemp?
Yes, thank you, Kelly. Yeah, look, I think it's a good plan. As for the key planned activities, just to give you an overview where I'm coming from, I don't want to get dragged into having a whole list of them again. I think we need to look at maybe a bit more strategic thinking about, what are some of the key planned activities. So if we put things under capital budget projects, key capital budget projects, it might be 3 or 4 under key capital budget. There may be some key asset management projects that we could look at, plans, what we put under that. Planning, what are some of the major planning projects that we may be looking at? The foreshore, for example, and there could be 2 or 3 of them under that one. And also the other one I did have here somewhere, but just I can put them through just an idea. But I think putting under headings would be more viable than just having a complete list on a page, but you have them under key components. And the 4th one was key economic development projects. What are we doing there? So you might have about 12 overall or 15 under 4 major headings. I think that would look more better in my perspective, and people to read this document and say, oh yeah, I can see exactly what they're trying to achieve under the capitals, the asset management plans, the economic development and planning, just as some ideas, but I can throw them through to you. So you look at that as an option. But apart from that, I think it works quite well. I think it reads very well and it's laid out. So again, there's no point talking about the key planned activities and because they may change as in the costings in some of under the ideas of roads or footpaths. So yeah, but overall it's a good document.
So just to clarify, so you're talking about as well as the one pager at the back in the appendix and the breakdowns, like on page 34 and 35 in the yellow tables, that an extra section around significant big projects having their own heading?
Oh, sorry, I should have clarified. Page 46, really just put them under some key headings, some of the key activities that we're doing under those key. The rest can stay as they are, to give them a bit more structure around those key areas of aspirations. But I think under the key planned activities on page 46, I think I like to see more of a more strategic approach about how some of these major projects and where they sit under.
Yes, just to, again, to clarify, if you go to page 24, for example, so roads, footpaths and bridges, we've pulled out 3 of those key planned activities. They may not be the significant ones, or we could actually list more specific ones, but they are specifically capital key planned activities from that area.
I understand what you're saying, but again, it's going back, like we had before, 271 or 285 key planned activities. We're having a list on a page. So either we don't have them or you just stick with what you have in the yellow boxes.
So the one on the page is what's in the yellow boxes.
Yeah.
So
okay.
we've pulled out what was in those yellow boxes and just put them in a one page. So again, we could put the headings under, because they fall under the particular budget headings of roads or car parking, traffic management, economic development. We could put the headings under there, but they are the same ones.
Yeah, I just thought
it
just might be ease of looking at instead of just a whole list of.
No, that's fine. I think it's about having that clarity is important. I think also what's probably important is looking at obviously some of the capital items and the operating items as well. So I'd probably get Kelly just to highlight in terms of that deficit, predominantly what it's made up of. And I think we did highlight that at the last budget workshop.
May I ask a quick question? This confidential section here, will we be discussing that later on this evening? There's 38 possibilities there.
We won't probably discuss it in any great detail. That wasn't about pulling that into this annual business plan and budget, but it's obviously a list that we have bubbling away that we need to give consideration to about feeding into our asset management plans and our long-term financial plans, and looking at some commitment from council as to where you want resources and time to be generated into each of those areas. So it was as a result of those discussions or emails I'd had with Councillor Kemp. And while some are referenced in the long-term financial plan and have appeared in the annual business plan, some don't have a path at all at the moment. So we weren't going to discuss it in too much detail. I think that requires a separate closed workshop so that you can have a full, open, frank discussion about them.
Okay, so if you're happy, just I'll give a bit of an overview of the operating budget. So we're sitting at a deficit of just under 951,000 in the current draft, and that is built on a rate model with no increase, growth only, as discussed in previous workshops. So that $951,000 deficit, if we look at the components that are significant and different to the current financial year, there has been an estimated increase in depreciation of between 300 to 350,000. The rates component for not raising rates by CPI is between 300 to 400,000. We have the increases to community services activities because of the withdrawal of Alexandrina Council from regional programs, which is around $200,000. And then we also have about $100,000 that is for the new PDI Act implementation, software programs, training and accreditation that's included with that. So that gives a bit of an idea of what that amount is, taking into account our normal recurring projects, as well as those budget bids that come through each year, offset of course, because this year's ones drop off and new ones come on as council activities need to happen for things that are periodical rather than regular annual allowances. In terms of the previous comments around funding agreements, same applies. So we've received notification of some operating grants that we've been successful in. We haven't seen all of the funding agreements for those. So in terms of the income recognition, again, I need to go through each of those funding agreements to make sure that we can actually recognise the income in 2021. So that is still a variable. The other variable is that we have received advance payments of financial assistance grants again. We've been told that it's approximately 50%, but may not be, of next year's allowance. So we won't know what we'll be exactly receiving in 2021 until it goes to the Minister for approval. And I doubt that will come through prior to July, August at this stage, because we've got the early payment. That being said, in the 9 years that I've been here, we've only not received advance payments once. So I think that's the new norm, and we have made an allowance in the budget for 2021 for that to happen again next June this time around. So hopefully it won't give us too much grief once we get that notification. In terms of the key financial indicators, we don't meet any of Council's targets in their long-term financial plan. There's commentary in the annual business plan about a deficit budget and not making that decision, taking that decision lightly in terms of COVID-19 recovery processes and the business support that Council has indicated they want to provide across the region. So the operating surplus ratio reflects our deficit position at a -3%, just over -3%. The net financial liabilities ratio, even with the $7 million in borrowings, is just over Council's target, which is 60%, 40 to 60%, so sitting at 62.4%. That's with the $7 million borrowings built into it, so that one's not far off. In terms of the asset renewal funding ratio or the asset sustainability ratio, it's above Council's target of between 90 and 110% because we have a huge amount of projects basically in there. So it still looks likely that we would meet the rolling 3-year average of around 100%. But at this point in time, Council needs to consider those key financial indicators, and it wouldn't be something that you would consider lightly without wanting to get back to meeting those targets, in the next couple of years. So in terms of the rating policy, capital valuations have grown by 2.6%. So we haven't had a drop in capital valuations. Approximately 0.9 of that is around subdivisions and improvements or developments of properties. And then the 1.7 is due to market growth. So we have reasonable growth in this area at this point. I would expect an increase in valuation objections to the Valuer General with that type of growth in this type of environment. But We also are waiting on a number of revisits to properties that have been developed as well. So there may be an offset there in terms of some more growth from subdivisions and property developments, such as when a vacant block is built on, basically. So they will continue to do those revisits up to the end of June. So in terms of the rating model, like we said, based on a no rate rise, so the differential rate remains the same, the fixed charge remains the same, and then that's just applied against the capital value that's provided by the Valuer General. So some people will see an increase if their property valuation has gone up, but if they haven't had an increase in their valuation, they will pay exactly the same in 2021 as they did in 1920. Any questions on that in particular, Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Kelly. The 1920 budget increases, so going into 2021, off this year's current budget, what's the increase there? I know that you had CPI originally, to that you increase the current budget, and then you'll have your budget bids will be added on top of that. So what is the overall figure for the increase without the extra budget bids?
So the increase overall with everything, including the deficit amount, is around 2.4%. But that is, and the March quarter CPI for Adelaide is 2.4% as well. So in terms of the additional costs that have been added, no rate rise, and the other factors that have been taken into account in terms of increased borrowings, it's sitting around CPI as an increase. But we have knocked out as many possible small increases throughout the budget. So where there were increases around the $100 to $500 in individual job numbers, they've all been taken out, and we've just said to staff, you need to just spend what you spent last year. There's no increase, even if CPI was applicable to that line in terms of what's purchased. So I need to do probably a little bit more analysis on that. I've only had a really quick look at what that overall increase is, but that includes budget bids and the increases we just talked about in terms of depreciation, the no rate rise, community services and PDI Act.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to gather, and maybe I didn't ask the question very clearly, you know, is about $300,000 on the base rate, on the base budget line as from this year to next year. Then we add on all those additional costs, which brings it up to the 950 deficit. So I'm just wondering where's the start point in 2021?
So in terms of the base budget is pretty much as is pretty similar. There's a few lines that have had increases because of EB, would be one thing that would have an increase, and there are some lines that have increased because it's actually more than CPI for those, such things as water or electricity, where we've had to apply a high index. In terms of the budget bids, what will come out from 1920 is similar to what's been provided to council to go in for 2021 in terms of those activities. So it's the budget is actually fairly even in terms of 1920 expenditure in 2021, except for those items that I read out that are peculiar to this year.
Yep, thank you. I guess my position with COVID-19 and also potential of revenue dropping, we don't know what will happen as we go into the new financial year. We don't know what the recovery process is, all those things that will come up in the future, how it will impact on us. But if I just put the two documents together, the capital budget, I think, you know, yes, 15 million is a lot of money to borrow, and I have no problems borrowing or, you know, having that amount of budget for our capital, because we've set in place a lot of strategic plans and processes to ensure that we are set for the next few years in developments. And the Mayor spoke about that quite openly, and it was quite good in that. So my concern with the capital is we go through this process, we do it. The following year of 21, 22, 22, 23, then what's our borrowing capacity then, you know, in payments back? Do we have enough to develop these projects that we're buying for or paying for now? You know, so we may not be doing much in the way of development in the next 3 or 4 years because we're paying back this major debt. That's one aspect of the capital. So I have concerns about looking at spending that amount of money and getting borrowings to do that. But long as we can look at the future and see what is the capacity of council to continue without all of a sudden, you know, because I'm not quite sure after the Ring Road and the Civic Centre was built, it took about 3 or 4 years for council to start borrowing again on major projects. So it may look good now, but it's like the old boom and bust. You know, we may have to stop for 3 or 4 years. So something to think about there. If you want to just answer that one, I'll just finish up on the operating afterwards. Thank you.
So in terms of the net financial liabilities ratio, using that as our key indicator around that borrowings and loans feed into, most of the correspondence from, you know, the LGA and industry guidelines is that councils can effectively have 100% net financial liabilities ratio easily. And what that basically means in very general terms is that you can borrow up to the capacity of your rates income or higher, if there's a particular reason for it without it being a problem. In terms of those larger projects, I think for council to be in a financially sustainable position, we would want to have significant grant funding to offset those significant projects. And it may be a process of wait until there's some grant funding available before we go down that track. If we wanted to do all of those significant projects in the same year or the same 2 years, again, we would need to look at that in terms of where we're sitting at that point in time and what's happened in between now and that build date, to give a really good indication. At the moment, I'd just be guessing. But you know, $7 million is pretty big borrowings in 1 year. The good thing that we can put it down to in terms of how to justify that is there's $4.6 million odd on one significant project that we've got significant grant funding for. There's some very large strategic purchases that council is looking at. And there's some other really big projects that will have a really longer term impact on the community. So it's around balancing up those loan borrowings and the benefit to the community. That is a significant reason for actually being able to take those out. But once we go through the review of the asset management plan and the long-term financial plan, and then plug in some key dates around when council wants to do these projects, we'll be able to provide a much better indication of our financial sustainability and ability and capacity to repay loans. So at the moment, I think it's a bit of a wait and see, because we will need to do that work to give you that broader level of understanding and confidence in the figures going forward.
Thank you. And just my comments on the operating budget. If we're having a major capital budget like we are, which is a fantastic thing to do because we are doing some great things with it, but to have an operating budget with a large deficit, to me, is at odds in my mind. I think that if we're going to have a large capital, we need to reduce our operating down to give us some little bit of flexibility. A deficit, how you want to paint it or put it, has to be paid for some way or some time. So all we're doing is just increasing our debt, you know, from 1 year to the other. And yes, we can get grant funding that comes in early and that offsets the debt to maybe a surplus, a deficit. But again, we have to find that money the following financial year to cover those grants, that money that come in. So my concern is about, you know, revenue dropping to or whatever unknown foreseen for the future will increase our deficit. And also I think that, you know, I'll rather operate under a break-even operating budget with a large capital budget. In my mind, I think that will be a good message to the community that we're, you know, prudentially financial accounting our money and the community's money quite well. The only thing I would ask of, and I suppose it's difficult for us to sit down here and go through each of these lines and say what's in, what's out. I would imagine the staff and through the CEO and yourself, Kelly, and the directors, you'll know what really is required, you know, for the next financial year and what really can be put off again. I know you may have gone through that process already and this is what you come to. But again, is to do both budgets like that, to chip away and bring back to the chamber a possibility that really this is, you know, really you don't need it. For example, the extra money required to watering the reserves, to me, I don't think we need to spend that amount of money in an operating budget to water the reserves longer because of potential climate change, etc. They're those types of things we don't need in the budget yet. I think we do water our reserves, and I think there's certain reserves have to be watered on a regular basis. Others do not have to be. And I think they're the type of decisions we can chip away at. But for us to do it, that's fine, but I'm quite willing to sit here as long as it takes. But also, is it possible that it might be simpler if you go back and look at those budget items and think, well, really, we can do without them, but they're not really essential? Because I think that's what we need to be looking at for this year, for next year's budget, is what are the essential things we need to deliver, you know, and what things really can be put on hold. So what must we be doing? What could we be doing? What should we be doing? You know, and try and reduce that deficit down, because I think the community may look at it from a perspective, and we won't know until we get their consultation remarks back, that, you know, having a high capital and a high deficit may not look attractive.
Yeah, so I guess just a couple of comments on that. Take all your points on notice. In terms of reducing both either the capital or operating budget. So in terms of reducing the operating budget, yeah, absolutely. You know, we have gone through it a number of times, and SMT sat down before we put the annual business plan together to go through what could come out, or what staff felt could be deferred, and there were a number of items that did come out, because we were actually sitting at about a $1.4 million deficit. So we have taken a razor to the budget as much as possible from staff administration point of view. In terms of reducing the capital budget, it still won't assist really our operating budget. Only in terms of loan borrowings and future budget interest repayments. So it won't help in this particular year if we took out some of that capital budget. So I guess there's a couple of things at play there. Whilst I take your point that you want to reduce the budgets, reducing one doesn't necessarily offset the other, and definitely not to the same amount as would happen.
Yes, just to add to that, in terms of your capital budget and its significant size, I think Kelly's already outlined, you're doing some significant projects that we have been able to access significant grants that wouldn't normally be around, and that's about stimulating our economy and getting contractors, and hopefully, well, they will be where we can local. But we also have our own workforce that we need to keep work and keep them busy. So while we might be able to take out various lines of operating, it means we don't have staff being active and actually delivering on some of the projects that they need to be delivering on. Some of the operating items, significance, is around the depreciation increases, and that's because of having to reevaluate our depreciation requirements of new assets that are coming on board, and we're doing that again this financial year with new assets coming on board with some of our strategic purchases. It's also the significant impact this year will have on the changes to our community services programs, because we have to honour a number of grants and deliver those services regardless. But one of the key things we do need to do this financial year is undertake a review of our community services, so we're not in the same position next year, and look at what we are delivering, what other grants we apply for, or what services we look to provide to our community. And the other main area is we're not having any increases in our rates. So we would normally, even a CPI would probably meet some of those needs. Not so much the significant increase in our community services program, that wouldn't have been met by a rate increase. Possibly the depreciation increase, it would have been met. But it's quite an unusual budget to have to bring forward, particularly with a significant capital. And also with having to cut and also not increase our rating, which normally in our long-term financial plan, we would be at least implementing a 1.9% rate increase. So we're not doing that this year. Some councils are just sticking with their long-term financial plans as they previously had prepared to do, and many councils are staying with that. Others are looking at no rate increases depending on their community circumstances. Every community is different in terms of its ability. So certainly a deficit budget is not the best place I want to be presenting to council or community for consultation. But as long as it's not consistent and you're seeing it over year after year, that's when I'd say we're not financially sustainable. But when there's detailed explanation as to why, what you're doing and what you're doing it for, then there's justification for that. But again, it's a budget. And at the moment you're sitting, well, the budget review, we started for 1920 with a balanced budget. We're currently sitting at a $700,000 deficit, which we believe will come back again because we're getting grants ahead of time. So again, that'll be coming down. When I started in 18 with the 17-18 budget, I inherited a $1.2 million deficit, and we end up finishing that year with a surplus. So again, I've said to you before, we're going to have to comprehensively review this budget every time we have a budget review, because it will be changing. The environment is changing monthly at the moment, so we don't know what will be coming at us. And hopefully we will end up in a much better position than we currently are. Councillor Robertson.
Thanks, Victoria and Kelly. To me, one of the things that we really have to focus on is that in terms of getting grants, or you mentioned before, Kelly, about getting more grants. To me, plan for the worst and hope for the best. That the grants stream that we might be expecting in the future, I think, is going to be extremely limited and way less than what we've been used to. The opportunities for us and the place we really need to focus on is bringing private enterprise capital into what we're doing here in Victor Harbor. That'll be particularly important in terms of some of the big 800-pound gorilla potential projects that are coming at us, that for which we're not going to be able to borrow money for. I don't think, because as Councillor Kemp was pointing out before, here we've already loaded up ourselves in this year's borrowing, which is going to severely impact on other years. And we know that we have about 3 or 4 really big projects, one of which I don't think is in the back of this document tonight, but which has been actively under discussion, it's not there. So to me, it's really about the issue of, yep, if you can get future Commonwealth and state government grants, well and good, but we as a city need to be focusing on attracting private investment into Victor Harbor to achieve the development we're looking for. On the operating budget, I think there are still some places where we can go. For instance, some of our businesses, you know, the Visitor Information Centre loses about $100,000 a year on bookings. Why are we still doing this? The bookings arrangements, you know, we book business, but the revenue we get back is about half. It's about $100,000 loss. The Visitor Information Centre is increasingly, and post-COVID, is going to be...
Councillor Robertson, can I just clarify? It doesn't lose $100,000. Obviously, that service promotes businesses and tourism operators, services within our region, not just in the city of Victor Harbor, and we undertake a booking service as a service to our community. So it doesn't lose money. Obviously, it's something that we provide to our community and our business operators. So they would take, I think it's over $600,000 worth of bookings through that VIC for businesses that operate within our region.
Well, my reading of the accounts is that there's basically about $200,000, about $100,000 of income for that booking service, which then it costs us about $200,000 to get it. But I might be wrong, but to me that was an area, a business of ours that needed to be, we're wondering, you know, really, is this actually worthwhile for us to be engaging in that? And in the post-COVID environment, it's very clear what's going to happen in the future. That's why all of our businesses in Victor need to be online, and not just on there with a pretty website, but being able to take bookings, be able to make payments and take payments on that line, another level altogether from where most of them are. And that's going to be a key indicator of survival or non-survival into the near future. And so the visitors that come, you know, not many are going to come down here and then go straight to the Visitor Information Centre and say, oh gosh, I've arrived in Victor. What do I do today? I'll go to the Visitor Information Centre. It's highly likely in the future that they're going to do all of their bookings before they come. So to me, there's savings in the Visitor Information Centre on some of the horse-drawn tram stuff. I've made my position clear. We've had a very excellent response from the CEO in terms of what's going on, in terms of the funding provided to that authority. But here we go in terms of this year again, the amount that's being provided for the horse-drawn tram authority is pretty big. And but with no business plan out there, I'm not in a mood to be voting for it. But the other things in terms of our the Waste Authority, which I think is doing a great job, the separation out on the rates notice. I think, Kelly, we discussed this previously, that being able to separate out in the rates notice to say that, you know, these are the payments made for waste collection and recycling, and that these should be shown separately and could be subject to a more of a break-even user pays type arrangement in the rates notices.
In terms of that, if I can just answer that, we would have to do that as part of the rating review, because that would be a totally different structure to what we currently do at the moment. So we would have to call that essentially a separate charge and go down that phase. But it's definitely something we can explore with the rating review.
And on some of the other projects that are bubbling near to the surface in terms of attracting the most attention, some of those projects are ones that have significant operating costs associated with them. So these are ones where it's highly likely, as opposed to building a bridge, for instance, which just has some maintenance costs from time to time. If you build, for instance, an arts and culture centre, that's going to be, it's going to have a significant subsidy element to its operations. That's fine. That's understood to be the case. But the extent to which those costs are going to be built in and be captured in future operating budgets is significant. And already as we say here, you said here that this year we have, or was alluded to by the CEO as well, we have, in cutting back activities, we then have staff who are tied to those activities that are not necessarily fully occupied. So, yeah, it's a matter of keeping some of those activities going, but also in a bigger sense, the budget that was put aside this year to look at the new enterprise resource software for the council to replace the old legacy software, which does cost us a lot in terms of not just that now some of the operating systems are no longer supported, but it also means we have extra staff on to carry over the deficiencies in those programs. This is a cost to us when, to me, in future, in terms of where do we want to be in 10 years' time as a council, in terms of the structure of our organisation and the structure of the staffing, this sort of thing has to be worked out well before we start down the path of looking at what sort of enterprise resource software we have. So, but this year, to me, there's bits and pieces in here that we should be looking at in terms of seeing what we could do to further reduce this deficit.
Sorry, just to add to that, I want to correct myself. I was wrong with my figure and I've got to the page. So in terms of the income for the VIC, you were correct. It's around, in terms of $200,000 in bookings. But one of the items that is on that strategic project list and has been before this council from when I arrived is around the combining of the VIC and the Whale Centre around the cost savings. So that is on the list and it is still being looked at and is one of those forums that we still want to come back to the Chamber about combining those two or looking at the efficiency of those. But again, all of those things take time to even look at. And if we look at the last 12 months, this council has been very progressive in the projects it's been looking at and its opportunities that have come before it, even that weren't planned, that we've concentrated a lot of our efforts on as well. So.
And I guess to go on with some other commentary there on things that should come out of the budget. I mean, the budget officers and staff involved in the activities have been through to cut things out. SMT have had extra meetings to see what we can pull out and what costs can be pulled down. You know, I'd be interested if there's anything specific in there that elected members don't want to see. And in particular, you would be looking at particularly the discretionary items or those that came forward as budget bids. But we've already done as administration what we think we can possibly take out. And what's in there is based on the relevant officers undertaking those duties think need to stay in. So this is essentially your chance. Tell us what exact specific projects, dollar amounts you want to come out, so we can build a budget around that, a draft budget around that to bring back to you. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. Just going back to the capital budget items, I just want to ask a question about the bridge item 63618, Franklin Island. Is that required because of safety requirements, or is that it's not something we could put off until the following budget year? It needs to be done now, I presume.
I'll let Glenn add to that one. It has been an ongoing matter, but it's also, I think it's to do with the actual deterioration of the bridge as well. Is that correct?
Oh, just sorry, the number that you quoted, the topic?
Franklin Island, item 63618, bridge.
Oh, the bridge. That's the replacement of the timber for the pedestrian, yes. And using as a different type of products being considered there. It's deteriorated badly in the last couple of years. Yes, thank you.
Councillor Charles?
People watching this must wonder whether we know what we're doing to a degree. But it's very, very dull and boring. I think they probably would have switched off by now. In the key plan activities on page 46, the plan, it's only a $60,000 amount. It pales into insignificance. It's a lot of money to me. It's a lot of money to the public, but in the terms of our budgeting, Hayward Court beach access, we're talking about the middle column at the top, Hayward Court, Hayborough, $60,000 for a new stairs. There are 5 sets of stairs on our side, commencing with that one, number 1, and then there's another 4 before you get to the car park, the investigator car park. And this would be the best set of stairs that we've got out of a lot of them. The others, there are some there that are just disgusting, you know, and yet we're even putting this in our plan. To me, that's something that's just absolutely not required till we know whether we've got section 51 or not for a start. But obviously the public are going to get this pretty close to what it is now. We're not going to make a lot of changes tonight, I don't think, or even in the next day. So they're going to say, yes, tick, 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 we'd love that junior scooter park, we'd like this, we'd like the other. And then we're going to have to extract and remove things later on.
I'd prefer to actually give the community something that you feel more inclined to want to adopt. So, you know, it's not ready to go to the community as yet. We are in that process of wanting to, which we have done over each of the workshops. Yes, the COVID implications have had an impact, but we've still been workshopping this whole budget since last year. So we wanted to be able to take to the community something that's close to what the council is ready to support, and then actually get that feedback from the community. If you're way off track, then we need to reconsider. I don't think it's really fair or of a good consideration of the chamber to send something out that you're not prepared to support or endorse.
Well, that'll fall to everybody's lot when the voting comes along. But at this time, of course, to me, you know, no one's, when I keep saying, let's continue with the bike path where it currently is, the walking path where it currently is, because that's where people are currently using it, and will continue to use it regardless of whether there's one on the sandhills. But no one said, Peter, you know, this is why I don't agree with that. There's no argument that's coming forward to say why we're not updating and increasing and fixing up the roads up the top, the footpaths, the whole lot, which is the main thoroughfare that people are currently using. And we're just, anyway, look, this is not the time for this, but yes, we have had a lot of budget meetings and we've had a lot of presentations made to us. There's been a lot of people trying to sell things to us and tell us about things, but we haven't had much stripping in or putting out.
Well, I don't think it's been a selling to you. It's actually an opportunity for members to read the documentation and give your feedback. So I'm presenting information based on decisions the chamber has made over a period of time, about information we've received from community, about projects that need to be done, and drawn upon the plans that this council has endorsed over a period of time about its assets and projects the council is looking to actually undertake. So yes, we make presentations. One is about trying to educate and inform members about the different decisions you need to make in regards to operating and capital budgets, but also is to get your feedback as representatives of the community about what you'd like to see in and what you'd like to see out, so I can build and formulate a budget to present to the community for consultation. So I can talk till the cows come home, but I'm constantly opening up to the floor to members to get your feedback.
That's very smooth, but you're absolutely right. It's a very difficult job that we all try to do as we beat our heads against the wall with our own little, you know, point of view. But your team of directors are salesmen. You know, Brian Doman is a salesman. He's trying to sell an idea and a project, and he's doing a good job. If we put up a motion, we're trying to sell a motion too. It's no different from a sales pitch.
I don't think Brian Doman is one of my managers, and he's not a salesman. He is qualified in what he does and undertakes a role for this council and this organisation. And I think it's very unfair to refer as staff as salesmen. Staff are responsible for giving you the information you need to make informed decisions. And if you need further information, you ask it and we provide. If you want further clarity, you ask and we provide. If you want costings and estimations, you ask and we provide. This is actually a team effort. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm trying to assist council so we can make decisions for our community.
Just we've talked before about taking that chipping away, and I just wonder in these key planned activities on this chart that Councillor Charles is looking at. Question is, do we need to have the gym equipment account reserve changed over this financial year, or can that wait for another financial year? And also the junior scooter park design, does that need to happen now? They're two things that that could perhaps be taken out.
So just to answer that, in terms of the junior scooter park, yes, it's not in any asset management plans at the moment. So potentially, if that's the way the chamber wanted to go, that could be taken out. In terms of the Kent Reserve gym equipment, that's already been ordered and the funds have been committed. The reason it hasn't been installed this year is because there was a delay due to COVID-19 in getting that equipment from overseas. So we are already committed to that. It's a work in progress that'll have to be carried forward. So we won't expend all of the funds this year. And that's similar to the Hayward Court stairs as well. They're work in progress that have been unable to be completed by the 30th of June because of COVID-19. Councillor Kemp?
Yeah, I'd like to see the additional watering for the reserves, the A, B and C reserves. We've had a fantastic rainfall coming. This is what happens, it's seasonal, it comes and goes. So I don't think we need to be looking at that. And I think for future internal savings, we could be looking at a dry park policy on some of those reserves. We don't need to water them. There's little reserves all the way down Franklin Parade with underground sprinkler systems that comes and goes all night long in various times. We don't need to, I don't believe we need to be watering those verges like that. Trees and plants are different, but you know, little bits of lawn here and there. But I think we just need to review that whole watering system. I think you could save $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 quite easily, or $100,000 a year on watering. Certain reserves need it, the ovals, the sporting grounds, Warland Reserve, those key areas that attract and have people there, yes, but the C and B grade reserves, I think we could find efficiencies in how we look after them, especially with watering. It is a commodity, it's a very rich and source that we need to have. We've got to be considerate. I know we do use some recycling water in some areas, but I think we just can't believe that we need to have such a greenery around, which is really, again, odds against the declaration of emergency climate change that we've made.
Councillor Robertson.
Yeah, thanks, CEO. I'd like to address the issue of the proposed staff increases for this year, 1.3 staff increases. To me, this is, I commented on this before when it first came up. I'm fully on board for the rate review, the need for staffing in terms of the rate review process. But I'm wondering if that couldn't be done with consultant assistance, but also some of the other proposals for staffing increases were ones related to what I regard as improvements in efficiency of communication within the staff cadre. And so again, with those things there, is there any way that the proposal of the work to be achieved could be done in terms of consultant assistance, given that those two things that were related, one was, I think, related to improvements in the website, that that we might not be better off doing that through consultant assistance rather than and would allow us to spread the impact over a number of years rather than going in for staff increases.
So just to explain a couple of those positions, so we are proposing that the rating review is done externally with some internal support. So that there was a position, a 0.2 FTE that has been removed from the budget, so that we will need to go externally to get that done. In terms of the positions that are in here, there's 1.4. 0.4 is an environmental projects officer, which I'll leave to Glenn to explain. In terms of the other two positions, the 0.5 FTE communications assistant, whilst some of that work, if it was a project base, could be done externally, it's more of an ongoing process to make sure our website is up to date with the latest information and is continually checked for errors, and make sure that all the information and documents, forms, etc. are updated as they need to be. We don't have capacity within what we've currently got to be able to do that, or to in fact roll out our full engagement plan that Council endorsed last year in terms of how we want to increase our engagement with the community. So it's looking at making sure that we've got the resources to do that, which we don't currently have. In terms of how we were looking at working that, I currently have a 1 FTE in my area that works 0.5 in communications, providing some support to Michelle, and works 0.5 in assisting me as an admin. We're planning, if it was endorsed, for that position to become a full comms assistant role, and I would lose an admin person. But the other position that we're looking at is someone in a management accountant role. So that would be to assist in providing council with and staff officers as well in terms of training and assistance in developing more accurate and consistent budgets, and in turn providing some support to myself as well. So there is offsets in terms of overtime for myself for that position, as well as the offset from the loss of the admin person. So I'm essentially giving up something to try and gain something kind of different that would provide a higher level of service to both the organisation internally and to elected members and the community outward facing. And I don't think either of those roles would be particularly well suited to a consultant. I think it would end up costing us a lot more and not deliver the same value in terms of our information.
Sorry, if I just might ask a couple of more questions on that. On the website role, to me that is absolutely in the evolving nature of that, not just the websites themselves, but in terms of the skill sets required for that. Yeah, if you go down the route of having a staff to do that, you're stuck with a particular set of skills that come, and training can be provided to that staff, but essentially you're stuck with a staff component that's a static component in terms of capability. But in terms of the other and so the communication part, to me, the way it was written up originally by the staff was one whereby I was thinking, gosh, you know, really what's needed here is for all the staff to be providing, Michelle, I think, is with, you know, better feedback in terms of what goes into the content of the website, rather than having someone hunt around to do that. But yeah, I would, okay, you know the job better than I do, that's for sure. But I think that if there was a way for us to get what you need done, which is critical. Oh, and the other thing was that, of course, some of this I could just say, well, not musical chairs, but I mean your arrangements to try and fill these gaps the best you can, and appreciate the effort being made. But that these sort of things, this enterprise resource software is probably 3, 4, 5 years down the road. So in the meantime, you have the problem to deal with. But that I would imagine a lot of those positions would also be becoming gradually redundant as as you know, we move closer to having a better accounting software or financial software than we do at present.
I wouldn't think there would be a lot of redundancy there. We're really lean as it is, and at or over capacity. In terms of the actual finance team dealing with transactions, there's 3 people and myself. So it's very, very lean, and we struggle to keep up, even if you take out those even if you add in those efficiency gains we may get from new software. What the new software would allow us to do is get more, is to access information easier, to allow us to analyse it in a quicker time frame. So I don't think that there would be a great deal of redundancies within the staffing within the finance section. And you know, there's only so many more weeks I can do 10, 20 hours overtime. We've got to do something more permanent to provide the organisation with the information, training and support it needs, without having it left on, you know, a couple of people, which is a really big risk to the organisation from my point of view. Sorry, I am selling that one.
I'll just get Glenn to clarify the environmental project officer, which is to help deliver on the environmental management plan that council's recently endorsed.
That's a 0.4, so 2 days per week FTE environmental position. That was part of the endorsement of the environmental management plan, so the action and part delivery of that as well. and what we've got in the budget for the coastal management study. It's for review as well. So this position will be looking at that and ongoing commitment to other environmental projects as well throughout the council. Very popular role. Yeah, lots of work in that particular field with environmental management plan. We've got a workshop coming up early July, I think the 7th or the 11th of July, with the officer that's involved. It's just been seconded from the depot that's doing that at present, 1 day a week, and has been since the endorsement of the environmental management plan, but that's up till the 30th of June. So that's hence the reason for the 0.4 position from the 1st of July.
Just also draw members' attention to the annual business plan on page 15. There's quite an interesting graph in there around salaries as a proportion of operating expenditure, and it actually does demonstrate that in terms of salaries against operating expenditure, so not just CPI, but the amount of activities that we undertake has actually reduced over the last 4 years. So there would be an argument there that we are doing more with less, and that is showing within the organisation in terms of ability to deliver consistent, accurate, timely information at what is a higher level of expectation from you as elected members than we've been used to.
Councillor Schofield and then Councillor Mann, did you have your hand up? Or, no, Councillor Lilly, sorry.
Look, I've sat and listened to the comments that have been made tonight. I know that we have to be very diligent in moving forward. I also look at the things that have impacted us this year, and these are the impacts not only on our community, but the services that we actually offer our community and the visitors. Those impacts then also reflect through to our Wales Centre, our VIC, and the horse tram. And I do know that our VIC has picked up quite a lot of business because they are now doing most of the accommodation and bookings for Kangaroo Island, and that's a real plus. When I have a look at the documents that we have in front of us, and I look at the operating and the capital budgets, I look at the amount of work that the staff have done in trying to reduce and the deficits that we're heading into. I, at this particular stage, don't have an issue. I believe if we're going to move forward and the time is right, if we're going to borrow funding, we will have it at a better interest rate that really puts us on the front foot. There's a huge amount of opportunities that are going to come our way, and I think Victor Harbour's in a prime position to grab those opportunities as people are going to be looking for other places to do their business, to move out of the city. And within the tourist industry itself, we're in a prime position to pick up the national visitors and increase our state visitations before we go nationally. So I'd just like to, one, thank the staff very much for their input. I know they work extremely hard. This is my second term on council, and I'm fully aware of the limitations and the way that they work. I know we could do with some more staff, and I think we should be very proud of our staff, and in particular our outdoor staff. Our gardens and that around Victor Harbour are kept well maintained. I believe we have to have some green spaces, otherwise we're going to become a Cooper Pedy, and who wants to visit the sandy dunes all the time? But at this particular stage, I'm quite happy. We could nitpick and go further and further and pull out some important components and then regret. So I'd just like to thank you, the staff, very much, and also the other elected members for their input, and I do understand where you're all coming from.
Sorry,
Excuse me, no, are we having trouble with our live streaming? I've just had a text message been freezing. Wanted to just put that through, sorry.
Thank you. It may be the connection. The live streaming is still continuing according to Michelle. It's still all happening, so it could be their connection. So apologies if it is causing some issue. Councillor Litley?
Earlier tonight, it was suggested that our region might be prime for people to move down here, and potentially house prices will certainly hold steady or increase and the like. In my mind, that's based on what we are now, right now. People are attracted to Victor because this is what it is in this environment. So of COVID, post-COVID, or coming out of COVID. So if they're going to come to Victor Harbour and invest in Victor Harbour, it's based on what we already have. So when I look at the operating budget and the capital budgets and things, and what we might aspire to get here, I still see some opportunity here for some cuts, and it might not be the huge cuts, but everything is a step in the right direction to this and that. So based on that approach and myself looking through this, and this is where my head's at, and I would be looking at things like a floating pontoon for swimmers. Do we need it this year? I don't believe so. $28,000. It's been raised, the junior scooter park. Do we need it now? Perhaps not. It's not a necessity. The watering, I tend to agree with you that we don't need to, we should give some consideration to how we could reduce that. There's scope there to do that and get some reductions there. Hand railing, yes, another one for some steps down there. But I understand that's already been purchased, so it's already on the way. I weigh it off against things like walking trail development and renewal. Well, that's part of the attraction. That's part of the attraction. So if we think of it in that light, that I wouldn't be cutting that because that's an investment into bringing people down here. I think with the Visitor Information Centre, yeah, I absolutely have concerns about the expense of running that and what we get out of it. But right now, and knowing a reasonable amount about that industry, having a partner who works in the travel booking industry, I think that the time is absolute that we need to invest in that or keep it and really look to it, because the whole market as far as travel bookings and changes is changing. It's becoming more local, and it will do for at least the next 12 months. Something else that I had noted on here, I'm sorry, I've lost it. And this might shock a few people, I'm not sure, but the detailed design of Gillespie land, 28,000 this year, 50,000 over 2 years for a detailed design. Certainly not opposed to putting up projects or having a look at that and getting the designs in it, and we really do need that sporting space and we want to do that, but there's other work within the community. I can say right now that we might be jumping the gun to go to a detailed design when there's other options that could come back to the table, and work's going on in that space in around the Encounter Bay precinct. So they're things that, if I didn't speak up now, it might be down the track that we're committed to $50,000 over 2 years that may not be of benefit. There are a few of the things I'm considering. There's probably a few more in there, but otherwise, anything else I'd consider to cut out of there. I think it's been said already. So when it comes back, I'm in agreement or disagreement, and that will come back and I'd vote that way.
No, thank you. Appreciate it. It's very constructive. Councillor Kemp.
Yeah, just thanks for that, Brian. Just jogged my memory on another issue about timing is very important when we develop plans and prudential reports and business cases, because if we take the FRAC as an example, 2013, the FRAC business plan was written. When it was applied through the contract for the Y to take it up, they came back to council and said that's out of date. It's only, 2 years old, it's out of date, and they wanted more money because the business plan didn't actually scope out the actual true costs. So doing all these plans, designs and business plans and potential reports, if we don't have in place to build something within 2 years, we are risking wasting a lot of money because things do change. The Art and Culture Precinct, $100,000 in the capital budget, $65,000 in the operating budget. I'm not against it. I'm thinking, yes, let's do it, but we don't have a concept, we don't have a plan in place where we could actually articulate that this is when we're going to deliver it. Because if we wait, depending on what's going to happen after COVID-19, et cetera, we may not be in a position to build because we don't even know what the footprint is yet. We have a concept idea what the footprint may be, but to go out and start designing something which is only conceptual, I think at the moment is really a waste of money. Whether we can wait another year, because until we find out exactly what the footprint looks like and what we've got to work with, 1 year, we save 100,000 off the capital, we save 65,000 off the operating. And that goes with the Gillespie land, I suppose, as well. And let's not commit to it until we are actually 100% sure that is the right location. Because if there is other options coming up and things we need to consider, I think we can put those things on hold. We're not saying we don't want a basketball and stadiums, we do it. We want to put it in the right location. And location is everything, as well as timing when we start doing these things, especially when timelines blow out from 1 to 2 to 3 years. We just wasted a lot of money because things do change and we have to go back to the drawing board.
Does any other members, Councillor Mann?
Thank you, CEO. Yeah, just I guess similar comments to those of Councillor Schofield. Just listening to the debate around the table, just have a few points to make. Firstly, thank you so much to the staff for all the work that's been put into this. As been raised today, this has been a process that's been going on since last year. It's not something that has been done lightly or without any work. There's been a lot of time that's gone into this work, and that's very clear and evident in these documents and the position that we're in, considering the very difficult time of COVID-19. So again, a massive thank you to the staff, particularly you as well, Kelly, and your team. Excellent work as usual. And I think in terms of where, I guess these documents, where I sit on them, I think whilst there's been a lot of debate and we know fellow elected members have views on deficits and surpluses and them as being this, just the word deficit as being something that's terrible and a surplus being something that's good. But I think as it's been raised in some of the discussion is that we have to look behind these words because, for example, with this budget, we have a deficit, but we have to take into account a lot of different things. COVID-19 stimulating the economy, honouring all of our community services grants now that Alexandrina have pulled out, not increasing our rating so we can pass on those savings to our community, the increase of the depreciation costings, etc., etc. And I think when you look behind the word, you see what's supporting it. And it's the same way as if we had a surplus, but we weren't offering the community any services or really pulling things back. We can do that if the community wants us to have the word surplus, but not deliver them any services. So I think they're important discussions that we have to think about as we're debating this as well. Some of the more nuanced items in here, I think that I'd be supportive of the pontoon continuing. And I think we have to be careful with cutting our watering to green spaces, because I know that that's already a very thin budget, and I know our outdoor staff work incredibly hard and doing a great job to maintain our green spaces with the limited resources they have. And I think any this consideration around that needs to be investigated, because we don't want to make the spaces worse and in the end have to put more money to get them to a certain standard. I think just commenting on these last few comments about the Gillespie land and the sporting precinct. So I take on Councillor Kemp's points about location. I think, yeah, that's great. I think that council, and I guess Councillor Kemp and Lidley and myself, we weren't on the previous council, so I guess maybe our knowledge of what happened might be a little bit less around this compared with some elected members who were. But from my understanding, there was the location of the Encounter Bay sporting area that was heavily investigated, lots of community consultation. I think I had a role in some of that as well, giving a deputation to council to try and get that moving. Lots of work and consultation and money was invested into exploring that location, and then it came back that it wasn't going to work. The groups weren't coming together, it wasn't the right fit, and to force it was just not going to be something that would be achievable for all the other groups and all the other community members who really needed those facilities and were crying out for that. So that's why we then moved to the Gillespie land, and that's been where those investigations have been going along. And as the chair of that working party, it's been great to see how well those community groups have worked together to really push for this facility that will not just support their groups, but the broader community as well. And there's been some excellent discussions around that, and you'll see that when those reports come back. But I think we have to be very careful with just trying to thin this budget out as much as we can, because there are some very important things, and already the detailed design for that work is split over 2 years to make it more appealing for this budget year. So I think thoughts of cutting it is not a very wise decision. I think the Basketball Association, Youth Club, Athletics Club, and all the community that use these amazing resources wouldn't be very happy with that as well. So I think in representing them, I would be definitely supportive of moving it forward. And I think there's already been that compromise of putting it over 2 years to fit with the broader community and the budget and to play that part. So yeah, they're my comments. But yeah, again, thank you staff for the amazing work that you continue to do.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. So I was just going to give a brief, I'm not sure if anybody has any more comments, but I'd just like to add, in terms of the deficit, with a finance hat on, I don't like to see a deficit either. My ideal budget is a break even to 100K surplus, which means that we're covering all of our expenses and we're not overrating the community. But in terms of having a deficit budget, if there's reasons why we have it, it's not just a general overrun where we haven't been able to run in recurring costs. There are very specific reasons why we're presenting a deficit budget like this. In this particular year. So this isn't the last opportunity, and the special council meeting to adopt it for public consultation isn't the last opportunity. Will be another informal gathering to consider the results of the community feedback before we actually get through to that adoption process. So there's still time to adjust this and move everything around. It may be that we go to the community with that deficit and see what they say. Would they prefer to have less services and a rate rise? Or would they like a deficit for this year, and let's see what we can do to rein that in next year? So, that's the type of position we're in at the moment in terms of the community plan, the annual business plan. I have taken a lot of notes with everybody's comments, so we'll go back and have a look at each of those excuse me, each of those items and see what we can do in that space. I haven't heard an overwhelming deal breaker from everybody in regards to a specific project or activity, but we'll definitely go back and have a look through those notes and see what we can do. But that's one way to gauge whether or not council is on the right track when we do that public consultation and see what the community says. So that's one way we can get a really good indication of whether we're on the right track or not. But thank you very much for all of your comments. It's fantastic. Councillor Charles?
I'd like to compliment Braden on what he said and how he said it. It was very, very good. Please don't get the wrong idea about staff being salespeople. There's nothing wrong with salespeople, and sales are made all the time. That's how we get these things. This is obviously some sort of a sales pitch to the public out there as well. If we need a $900,000 or almost $1 million deficit, only 50,000 off it, then let's have it if we need it. but I can't see that we need it. I believe we can prune this some more, and then as we pass on through the next financial year, there'll be an opportunity to say, okay, we missed that, or we can see that opportunity, or we have a need in this particular area, and we can then put the money to it. As you've said, CEO, in the years that you've been here, we've had balanced budgets, and then we've still run into $70,000 or whatever it was, or 700,000. I can't remember the figures you gave us. And when you first got here, yes, you took the knife or the scissors or whatever, or maybe the razor blade to everything, because a couple of councillors said, for the very first time in this place, this has got to happen. And you did a great job with it. 3 councillors recently saved about $350,000 by not doing the tram track on the island. It's easy to do. Of course, it has to be done sometime in the future. But let's think about, some thinking outside the square. Does that tram track actually have to go all the way to the kiosk or to the restaurant? It just has to cross to the island. Perhaps it could be a turnaround point a bit closer. Perhaps we don't need to do it at all. There's so many ways to look at this, and we need to, to really plot through it all. And I don't see why we're getting a set of stairs that we don't need. That's one thing, and there's plenty more here. And there are a lot of things here I'd like to be seeing. I'd like to see this all done. I'd love to see it all done, because it's a matter of psychological well-being. This bike track for kids and the mountain biking and all the rest of it. This is what we want the public to say and to use. And I'm 100% for it. But there are things that can be cut out for the time being, like like we did with that train track. And that wasn't that was considered outrageous that we should even be talking about it at the time. But there are ways around not having to use the current people who are doing the maintenance over there, because Tom, the engineer, said he would back our own people doing it and sign off on the job, and will save a lot of money. Anyway, that's where I feel anyway. I think we miss many opportunities, and we spend a lot of money that we don't have to spend. I see it over and over in my 2 terms that I've been here.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. Councillor Robertson.
Just a question to Kelly and the CEO. Let's say, for instance, we do our best to further prune the operating budget, which I think we should do. We get down to a figure of, say, $300,000 or something like that, $400,000. Is it more honest for us to go out to the community and say that, look, in these circumstances, what you do is you impose a rate rise or an increase to the fixed charge to cover the $300,000, so that we end up the financial year in balance, so we don't spend more money than we've got. Is that a better way to go? More honest with the community to say, we've done our best as a group. There are things we're going to win some and lose some, but that we are better off, because it's kidding ourselves, as Councillor Kemp is saying. We're not trying to kid the community, because they don't need to know how to suck eggs. A deficit passed on to the next financial year is money that's picked up in the next financial year. We should start out, and particularly as next financial year, we could be taking a hit to our income, as well as to what we might be doing in terms of increasing costs, because we've got another round of large projects coming at us. So to me, to start off the 2021 year, what we should be doing is, if we can't reach agreement, we should say, right, I'm sorry, but we've done our best, but we now have to go out and put a fixed charge increase or rate rise to cover that amount. So we start out in 2021 with a balanced operating budget.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. So in regards to the question about which would be more honest, I think both of those options are honest and transparent. It's about what option we choose. They're just two different options. So in terms of pulling down the current deficit, we make that understanding regardless of the rates conversation. You know, if there was projects that elected members wanted to be pulled out, we could reduce that deficit. If we're going to the community saying we have a deficit, but we're not going to raise rates, and this is the impact, it's just as honest and transparent as we have a deficit and we're going to raise rates to cover it. So it's just two different options and two different stories in terms of which way council would like to go. We did consider presenting a rate model that showed what around a CPI increase would look like, but we had got a very sort of clear understanding from discussions in the chambers that you wouldn't like to see a rate rise in this in 2021, and so that's why we've stayed with that option and shown what the result or impact of that decision would be on the finances. But yes, we could go out with either of those options. Councillor Kemp.
Yeah, just something that Kelly raised earlier is about the McKinley Street house, whether we bulldoze it over to make more car parks. I believe it'd be a capital project. I would have thought knocking it over and making it a car park, not so much bitumenised, but maybe dirt. But the reason why I raised it, just to have a discussion, I think it needs to be included in the discussions, because while we're upgrading the streets around the main business area, we're losing car parks. And I think there's an opportunity to get some of those car parks back. McKinley Street is a very central point where, you know, if we do bulldoze that house, then turn it into a, you know, flat car park, and then, you know, at least we've regained a few car parks. So I'm not quite sure what the costings would be, but I would have thought a demolition job was around 20 grand, and what it would do to make a nice car park like we've done out the back here next to the Meals on Wheels.
Yeah, we're currently seeking prices for the demolition, removal of the materials there, and reinstating the area with council staff with improving that rubble base and asphalt finish. Prices closed tonight. I haven't seen any figures for the demolition removal, but as an indicative figure, it'd be in the order, I think, around the $60,000. That'd be for the removal, the demolition, and reinstatement of the site. And I also believe there's a couple of wells in there, so there'd be some extra care needs to be taken with the reinstatement of those as well, how that would occur to ensure that there's no slump or deformation caused in the pavement at a later date, how that's reinstated with appropriate compaction. Yeah,
as long as it's not heritage.
I don't, I'm guessing it's an indicator of be in the order of $60,000, but we'll have those figures by tomorrow night.
And that is an option for council to consider, because there was still the consideration of demolition and providing some car parking spaces. The work that council was doing in terms of looking at the development of that site and whether whoever developed it would look at that removal as part of that contract. And also the other scenario is still the Anchorage building, the car parking facilities as per the development approval. So we're looking at going through all that process currently and bringing something back to council end of June, early July, because we need to give some indication back to the Anchorage in regards to the direction forward with that. So there's three options there, and we want to make sure council has the information for all of them. Just to add for tonight's discussions, when we aren't on the live stream, I do have some information that's come to light regarding a developer and one of the projects that's in the budget, but I need to do that in a closed session with members. But that is about the indication that we have interest still within our council area about development and development investment, which is really pleasing to see. And I think many of that is because of the investment the council was making in this community and its infrastructure. So that is what attracts that investment from private as well as government. We've also already received forewarning that the federal government is already looking for us to consider projects for grant funding in 2021 in regards to other shovel-ready projects we will have on our books. So the SMT have been looking at it as well. So that's come out from the Regional Development Australia. So there is still federal money out there, and councils need to be prepared with their projects if we are. Councillor Henderson.
I just want to make a general comment. We're talking about figures in black and white on paper, dollar amounts, but I don't think we should lose sight of our community as a whole when we're making these decisions. We are offering quite a lot in terms of budget amounts to support our business community, our tourism industry, all of which are very important. But I think when we're looking at items on a spreadsheet, we should also keep in mind the whole of our local community. And if we just take one small group of that, youth, for example, ask the question, what is in here for youth? There's nothing, I don't think there is, anything in capital expenditure for youth directly, per se. Kelly's shaking her head, so I'm correct there. So, you know, we need to think of our whole community every time we make a decision about these budget items, whether we leave them in or take them out. So, for example, the floating pontoon, there is one item that is directed to our youth. I'm not going to be using that. I don't think many people in this room are going to be using, maybe Braden. But I think this is just overall, you know, keep the big picture in mind of who our community is while we're making these decisions. That's all.
Thank you. So in terms of items that are still on the agenda for consideration, so I did give members the strategic projects list, and while I don't want to go into a full detailed discussion about that tonight, it was that list of projects, ideas, proposals that we've had presented to council that they haven't been lost and they were never lost, but we do need to consider them in terms of investment and time moving forward from the council and the administration. And so I'd like members to have a look at those, and I will look to hold a confidential discussion as part of our review of our asset management plans and long-term financial plan. Because we will need to look to incorporate them. And it's also an opportunity for council to look at those plans as to what's already in them. A lot of that has happened over a period of time, understanding why we have particular projects, why they come to fruition, do they still need to be in there, are they timed right? So those conversations, so that it will be of great assistance when we do our annual business plan and budgeting each year. We're pulling in that information, which is much more relevant, consistent with our community plan and all our other strategic plans that we have in place. The other item on the agenda was just the infrastructure asset management plans, and it was really a presentation of information from Glenn, and I don't know whether you want to add to that, Glenn, around what are in the plans and the process that just in preparation for that review period that's coming to council soon.
The asset plans will be commencing the review this month. So this is just to give a highlight of the current plan. And as an example, I use the open space, asset renewal and upgrades, and how some projects get listed in those asset management plans with the renewal or the new upgrade. And some of that's by the means of, you know, correspondence from residents, council reports, resolutions of council, asset revals, looking at the acquisition year and the useful life of the asset to get the renewal year, the condition assessment, developments by developers as well. It's got to be considered, and grants and funding. And so that forms part of the decision making. And I've put in there a useful life of open space assets. That's one measure. It's not always an accurate one of saying the age of the asset when it was acquired to the useful year. Life, and expected time for replacement. That's just an indicator. It's more so from a financial perspective, and we also look at from a condition being 1 to 5, being 5 it needs replacing. So it was just to give some background to how or why projects get into the asset management plans under the 8 categories we have under the assets.
So before you all head off and leave, and I need to give you some more information, I would just present our community. I know there's been some difficulties with our live streaming because I did get an email through, but from what we can see, it's been functioning quite well internally. So If there are any issues, I have received one email. I apologise if there's been some concerns with that, and hopefully we can fix that into the future. So I'd thank all of our community that's viewed our informal gathering tonight, and we look forward to having you back in the chamber when we come back after the long weekend, because that's when we'll have our gallery back in the room with us. And I'll follow up in regards to what those issues were regarding the live streaming. So thank you everyone for viewing from home, and I'll ask members just to stay for a moment.